Listen, I am Mama Otomba, and I have learned that the city of New York does not sleep the way men believe it sleeps, for beneath its steel bones and burning lights there is an older pulse, a rhythm that remembers things long before Harlem ever had a name on its streets. In the summer of 1954, when the air in Harlem was thick with saxophone smoke and the sweet sweat of crowded nightclubs, I first heard the drums that did not belong to any band in this world. I was living above a small bakery on 133rd Street, where the baker swore every morning that flour moved on its own at night, as if invisible hands were kneading bread for invisible mouths. That night I had returned from a gathering at the Club Eclipse, where the jazz men played until their fingers bled into the brass. And I remember how the trumpet of a young man named Ellis Grant had cried so deeply that even the drunks stopped laughing. It was after midnight when I first felt it, a vibration not in my ears, but in my bones, like the city itself had begun to hum in a language I had known before I was born. I opened my window and the street below was empty, yet the air shimmered like heat above desert sand, and I smelled something impossible in Harlem, the dry scent of African soil after rain, though no rain had fallen here in weeks. The drums came again, faint but deliberate, not the rhythm of any American jazz, not even the Caribbean beats I had once heard in gatherings of my people, but something older, something that carried the weight of walking barefoot across endless land where ancestors whisper through dust. I closed my eyes and I saw not with sight but with memory a caravan crossing the Sahel, shadows moving under a sky filled with watching spirits, and when I opened my eyes again, the fire escape outside my window was covered in ash that should not have been there. I told myself it was exhaustion, the kind that comes from too many nights listening to music that opens doors inside the mind. But then I heard my name spoken inside the drumbeat, not in English, not in any tongue I had learned, but in the language of bone and blood. "Mama Otomba," it said, like a hand tapping softly against the inside of a coffin. I lit my oil lamp, though electric light burned in the room, because some things refuse to be seen under modern brightness. And I took down the small wooden box my grandmother had given me before I left the old country, the one she said must never be open unless the world itself forgot its balance. Inside were cowrie shells, a strip of dried leather marked with signs older than written history, and a small iron bell that had never rung in my lifetime, though she swore it would ring when the boundary thinned. That night it rang. Not loudly, not violently, but like a whisper of metal remembering how to scream. Outside, Harlem's jazz clubs continued as if nothing was happening, as if men were not pouring their souls into horns while something ancient pressed against the underside of the city. I could feel it now, rising from the subway tunnels like breath from a buried giant, and I knew then that the drums were not coming from Africa, across the ocean, but from Africa beneath the city, from a place where the earth had been folded and forgotten when these streets were built. I wrapped my shawl around my shoulders and went down into the night, passing men in fedoras, laughing too loudly, passing women in red dresses who did not see the shadow moving against the brick walls behind them, and every step I took the drums grew clearer as if they were guiding me toward a truth that did not want to be found. At the corner of Lenox Avenue, I saw him for the first time, the pale man with eyes like polished bone, standing too still for a place so full of life, listening to something no one else could hear. He smiled when he saw me as if he had been waiting since before I was born and said nothing, but the drums changed their rhythm as though acknowledging his presence. I should have turned away then, I should have returned to my room and sealed my door with salt and prayer, but curiosity is a dangerous ancestor, and it whispers louder than fear. I followed the sound instead, down toward the old subway entrance that had been closed since the war, where rusted gates hung like broken teeth, and the air grew colder than winter memory. The drums were loud now, surrounding me, no longer outside me but inside me, and as I stepped past the gate, I felt the city above me forget I existed. That was the moment I understood I was no longer entering a place, but a memory the earth had refused to bury. And something beneath Harlem began to wake fully. When I stepped past that rusted subway gate, it was as though I had crossed not into darkness, but into an older kind of light, the kind that exists behind closed eyes when memory becomes stronger than sight, and the air itself changed its taste, thickening with iron dust, and something like burnt palm oil carried across impossible distances. The staircase descended too far, deeper than any map of Harlem should have allowed, and yet I recognized every step as if I had walked it in dreams I had never admitted to having. The drums now were not simply sound, but presence. each beat shaping the walls around me, making stone pulse like skin, and I understood with a cold certainty that what I had heard above ground was only the echo of something vast that lived beneath the city's foundations. As I descended, I saw markings on the tiles, faint at first, then clearer symbols that belonged to no European engineer and no American worker but to an older language carved in bone and grief, the kind of writing that does not describe things but commands them to remember. I reached a platform that should not have existed, lit by a dim, amber glow that came from no lamp but from the walls themselves, as if the earth was sweating light. There were figures standing there, still as statues, their silhouettes draped in garments that looked both African and something far older, as if every migration of my people had left behind a ghost that never found its final resting place. None of them looked at me directly, yet I felt every one of them knew I had arrived. The pale man was there too, closer now, and I saw that his skin was not simply pale but translucent, as if something beneath it was trying to escape into our world. He spoke without opening his mouth, and the words came into my mind like smoke, forming sentences saying that the city above had been built on a sealed rhythm, a forbidden drumline that once connected the living to the ancestral realm before it was buried to prevent the world from remembering too much. I felt my grandmother's iron bell grow warm in my pocket, as if it recognized his voice and did not approve. The drums intensified and the platform beneath us began to vibrate, revealing cracks that were not cracks but seams, as if the earth had been stitched together and was now being pulled apart from the inside. I saw flashes then, visions breaking through like fever dreams of African deserts, under twin moons of tribes dancing around fires that did not burn wood but time itself, of jazz musicians in Harlem whose solos were not improvisations, but echoes of ancestral calls they never understood they were answering. I saw Ellis Grant, the trumpet player, standing on a stage above ground, his eyes closed as the same rhythm I now heard beneath the city moved through his body, and I realized with horror that he was not playing the music, he was being played by it. The pale man stepped closer, and the air around him grew colder, and he told me that I had been chosen not to stop the rhythm, but to decide whether it would remain buried or rise fully into the waking world, because every drum that had ever been silenced carried a debt, and Harlem was now where that debt had come to collect itself. I wanted to refuse to deny the weight of such words, but then I heard another sound beneath the drums, something like thousands of voices speaking at once in a language of mourning and celebration intertwined, and I realized they were not calling for destruction but remembrance. The platform shuddered again, and one of the silent figures finally turned toward me, revealing a face I recognized, though I had never seen it before, the face of my own grandfather, as he would have been in his youth, before he crossed oceans and lost half his name to paperwork and survival. He opened his mouth, and no sound came out, but I understood him anyway, understood that the city above had forgotten too much, that forgetting was not peace, but a slow burial of truth. The pale man smiled then, and I saw behind him a corridor stretching deeper into the earth, lined with drums of every size, some carved from wood older than kingdoms, some made of materials I could not name, all beating in perfect synchronized sorrow. I stepped forward without deciding to, drawn by something that was no longer outside me but inside my blood, and as I did, the iron bell in my pocket rang again, louder this time, as if warning me that whatever choice I made next would not remain mine alone. The pale man whispered that once I reached the source there would be no return to the streets of Harlem as I knew them, because the city above and the world below were already beginning to mirror each other, and soon the boundary would no longer hold. And as I walked deeper into that impossible corridor of drums and memory, I felt the weight of every ancestor I had ever known pressing gently against my back, not pushing me away but guiding me forward into something that had been waiting since before Harlem was ever called Harlem. By the time I reached the deepest place beneath Harlem, I no longer knew if I was walking forward or descending into a memory that had decided to become real, because the corridor of drums had no end in the way streets have ends. Only a widening silence that pulsed like a living heart trying to remember its first beat. The air was no longer air but layered sound, each breath I took carrying fragments of voices, some speaking in the tongues of West African ancestors, others in the broken blues of southern chains, and all of them folded together into one rhythm that felt like the world confessing itself. The pale man was still beside me, though his shape seemed less solid now, as if the rhythm itself was wearing him down into something less human, and he told me without speaking that we had arrived at the place where all buried music returns to decide whether it will remain buried or become truth. Then I saw it. Not a chamber, not a room, but a vast underground hollow, stretching beyond sight, where thousands of drums were arranged, in spirals like galaxies, made of skin and wood and bone, each one beating without hands, without players, as if the earth itself had grown a memory of rhythm and could no longer forget it. At the center stood something that was not a drum and not a throne, but both at once. A great circular form carved with symbols that matched my grandmother's leather strip, and I understood then that Harlem had been built directly above a sealed ancestral engine, a rhythm engine older than cities, older than names, designed to keep worlds separated so that the living would not drown in the voices of the dead. But it had begun to fail. I felt it in my bones in the way the beats no longer stayed, contained, spilling upward through subway tunnels, through nightclub floors, through saxophones and trumpets, and human throats that thought they were improvising when they were actually remembering. The pale man stepped closer to the center, and for the first time his voice came through, not as thought but as sound, telling me that I was not the first to be brought here, but the first who still remembered both worlds at once, the world above where men called it jazz, and the world below where it was prayer warning and history refusing to die. My grandmother's iron bell began to shake violently in my hand, and I understood its purpose at last, not to stop the drums, but to choose their direction. I could silence them, seal the breach, force Harlem to forget again, and let the world remain as it was, safe in its ignorance. Or I could let the rhythm rise, fully letting the buried voices flood upward into every club, every street, every sleeping room, until nothing could ever again pretend that the past was gone. I thought of Ellis Grant above ground, his trumpet still singing songs he believed were his own, and I realized he was already standing on the edge of becoming a doorway for something he could not understand. I thought of the baker above my room, of flour moving like unseen hands, of all the small signs I had ignored, because the world had trained me to call miracles accidents. The drums swelled then, and the entire underground chamber began to breathe with me, as if waiting for my decision to become its next heartbeat. I raised the iron bell, and for a moment everything stopped, even time itself holding its breath, and in that silence I heard my grandmother's voice as clearly as if she stood behind me, saying that truth is never gentle, but it is always alive. I rang the bell. The sound was not loud, but it was absolute, and the rhythm responded not with collapse, but with opening, as if a sealed sky had finally remembered how to rain. The drums did not stop. They changed, rising upward like a tide breaking through stone, and I felt Harlem above me tremble as every hidden beat, every forgotten song, every buried sorrow and joy began to surface through its streets. I was lifted then, not physically, but in presence, carried upward through tunnels that no longer felt like descent, but like awakening. And when I opened my eyes again, I was standing at the mouth of the old subway entrance, the night above Harlem trembling with music that had no origin and every origin at once. Clubs did not fall silent, but their music had changed, deeper now, older, as if the musicians were no longer playing alone. The pale man was gone, or perhaps never separate from the rhythm at all, and the underground sealed itself again, not as it was before, but as something new, something that remembered without destroying. And I understood then that the drums from Africa under the city had not come to end Harlem, but to complete it, to bind every forgotten voice into sound that could no longer be erased. I am Mama Otomba, and I still hear them sometimes beneath the jazz, beneath the city's breath, reminding me that nothing truly buried is ever gone. It is only waiting for someone brave enough to listen.